All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Monetary Mentors Monetary Monastery, which might be the name we go with for this podcast. I have no idea. I'm Sam, the Monetary Mentor, and with me today, again, is my brother JP. Say hello to the good people, JP.
Hello, good people. I'm excited to be here and excited to take you on a little journey with us as we talk about how Wilds of Eldraine has affected the various formats we all know and love.
Yeah, so I think where we're going to start, we're going to cover a couple topics. The first is going to be generally talking about Wilds of Eldraine. We did a kind of a preview episode, so we're going to be talking a little bit about how it actually landed as a set, focusing on standard at first, and then JP is going to walk us through some brews he's been testing that feature some of those new cards. And then we're going to switch over to Explorer, where I can talk about my experiences in Explorer slash Pioneer, and I have some deck lists, both that I've been just kind of brewing up with interesting new cards, but also a couple exciting new budget options that I actually feel pretty good about. So I'm going to end up pitching those to you as well. I might even do a standalone video on one of them because I'm kind of high on it, but more on that later. So without further ado, JP, let's talk about Standard and Wilds of Eldraine.
Yeah, this is very interesting because this is, I think, a product of having 9 sets in standard. Normally we'd be at 5 sets, but they've changed things up. Now we're in a 9 set, and this will be the fewest number of sets that we ever have in standard, assuming they don't revert their
Yeah, I was gonna
changes.
say until they change it
Yeah,
again, but
until
yes.
they change it to 1 set, or I don't know what they're going to do. But for this time being, this is the lightest standard that we're going to have, and you can kind of see not a lot of changes. There are cards that really rose to the top. Virtue of Persistence, being namely the chief like E card that's in over half the decks in this standard challenge that we're looking at. Um, it's 52 copies, and it's just it's just an amazing card. I think when we talked about it in our preview, um, you were a little down on it because you didn't see it as a standard or playable or a 60 card format card.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like the adventure side of just being one of the best removal spells you can drop has really pushed it into control decks, it's pushed it into mid-range decks. There's no downside of playing this spell. It's at sorcery speed, but it really crushes a lot of the aggressive decks right in the spot. It kills everything relevant that they have and gains you some life to boot. So
Yeah, I'm
really love this
a little upset that I went first on that card because that was one where I like kind of dogged on it,
card.
and then you were
Yeah,
like, actually, I think this is pretty good in 60 card formats, like particularly
yeah.
standard. And then you explained like because it's just reasonable removal, and then
It's
yeah,
just
the
good
7 mana
removal, and
thing's
then
kind of bad, but then
yeah,
you get to it at the end if you need it, and it's a great extra
and
card to
it
have.
is bad. Trust me. The I have been playing this card, and there has been a number of times where I play it for 7 mana, and I just say, I have no other plays, so I'll play this, but I know I lose because of it. There's like, it is very slow. There's, I think we'll get to it, but I played about 50 games that I jotted down my results for, and it won me. I want to say one, maybe two of those games.
Yeah.
But the removal side of it is where it's at. It's
It's
just
so
one of the best
reasonable.
removal
Yeah,
spells
it's
we
so
have. Yeah.
reasonable on rate, and the it just comes with the upside of the other whole card attached to it that can, win
Yeah.
you 1 out of 50 games. But that ain't nothing. So yes, I felt like a chump a little bit because if you'd led on that card, I would have been like, yes, I agree. Now that I've heard your reasons, and I wouldn't
Yeah,
have.
yeah. No, it's tricky. It's with these adventure cards, like I mean, we both kind of passed over Bramble Familiar because we didn't see the future that was coming to us. But
Yeah.
yeah, why don't we just go right into Bramble Familiar? This is, I think, the only card that spawned its own archetype. It's not really its own archetype. It's kind of like a domain control deck that's did exist beforehand. This added a very spicy cascade flavor to it. Sam, are you familiar with this? Should I? I'm just going to explain it because, I mean, props to whoever came up with this deck. This is an absolute genius level brew. Whoever came up with it, whatever brain trust, put this deck into being. I mean, congratulations, you did it. Um, it's just an amazing deck. What it tries to do is play a until now very fringe card, Invasion of Alara. which reads, when it enters the battlefield, exile cards from the top of your library into exile two non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You may cast one of those two cards without paying its mana cost. This is Cascade, more or less, and it lets you hit. Oh, of course, you only have one spell that costs 4 or less. And what is this amazing, awesome value train card that costs 4 or less? It actually doesn't cost 4 or less. It's actually the adventure side of Bramble Familiar, which is a 7 mana spell. This lets you mill 7 cards, then put a creature, enchantment, or land card from among those milled cards onto the battlefield. So you spent 5 mana for your. I mean, keep track at home. You spent 5 mana for your Invasion of Alara, which is Wooburg, so it's not that easy to just get every time. And then you mill 7 and put a creature, enchantment, or land card from among them onto the battlefield. And of course, you got your normal offenders of Atraxa and Atali and a Phyrexian Fleshgorger to cheat into play. But then you also have Cemetery Desecrator, which I'd seen very infrequently prior to this. And what it allows you to do is to exile another card from your graveyard. When you do, choose one, remove X counters from target permanent. That's what you're going to do 9 times out of 10, where X is that card's mana cost. And you have in this deck Herd Migration, which is a 7 cost card that you can cycle into your graveyard for, very free. And now you hit 7 counters off of something. Oh, look, you have an Evasion of Alara with 7 battle counters on it. And now you get to cast Awaken the Maelstrom. And that's just, I mean, this is all for 5 mana, okay? Just so, like, target player draws 2 cards. That's you. Put an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield. Create a token that's a copy of a permanent you control. Distribute 3+1/+1 counters from among your creatures and destroy permanent and opponent controls. This is like game over amounts of value for 5 mana. I ran into this deck on ladder the first 5 times, and they hit Cemetery Desecrator every single time, and it always popped off, and they always ended up with an insurmountable board state on turns 5, and then at one time, because they tapped Bramble Familiar for mana, of course, on turn 4.
Yeah.
So that was a lot. I'm sorry. Hope you're with me on the other side of it, but it's a pretty cool combo. That being said, the deck itself is everything I hate about certain decks, where you counter it, right? You can counter the invasion. You know it's coming. You can tell these decks a mile off. They just start throwing their triomes down, and they don't have much to play because their deck is really just trying to hit a combo. And if it hits the combo, best of luck to you because you are not winning that game unless you're also running that combo.
You know what it reminds me of, honestly? Even though the deck's
Mhm.
like entirely different, it reminds me a bunch of those Tibalt Trickery decks that were
Yeah, I
running
was actually
around.
gonna make the same comparison.
Just in like, it's not that it's unbeatable or like unfair. Like you can counter the spell, you can race them. It's just like when it happens, it's like cool. You
Yeah,
know, like,
and
and the
yeah,
first time it happens, it is cool, and then because it is cool, everyone on the ladder also thinks it's cool and is playing it, and you just see it all the time, and it quickly becomes very uncool.
yeah. I think I've been playing a lot of standard on the ladder, and it was very prevalent until this like 3 days ago. People just stopped playing it. It's a very expensive deck. It's very hard. It has 2 uncommons and 4 commons. The rest are rares and mythics. Like
That goes against everything we stand for
it
here at
has
Monastery
it has a
Mentor.
couple basic lands, and I don't even know what the uncommons are, but it's an absolute like. I think that like well, the uncommons are in the sideboard, of course. It's very expensive. It's very hard to beat if it pops off, and if it doesn't pop off, it's like not a very powerful deck at all. Like it's I would rather like if they don't hit the Desecrator, it's playable. If they people keep hands that don't have the Invasion of Alara, and then they just sit there getting beat down and do nothing. So
So I'll push back against that a little bit. I haven't played a bunch of standard, but I have
mhm.
seen this deck a bit, And getting
Yeah.
to play Leyline Binding in like your domain control deck and
Yeah, yeah.
drag to the bottom is a
It
perfectly
doesn't it doesn't
reasonable
have
sweeper.
it doesn't have any doesn't have any like it has leyline binding and it can run what we were just talking about, virtue of persistence as removal. So it doesn't do nothing. But if they don't hit the invasion of Alara, it's
Yeah,
it's much easier. I
it's not great. It's
Yeah.
not great. I don't think this deck is gonna terrorize the metagame
No.
forever. I just think
So
it's
I was
low
I
key
was in a
annoying.
really bad spot. Like the first 5 times I played it, it hit every time. I didn't have any answer, and I thought the world was falling. And then I got a challenge to play red cards, so I played mono red, and mono red just runs this over. Like the fact that mono red is popular, my goodness, we'll talk about this a little bit later for another point. But mono red is the savior of the format. I'm convinced of it because it keeps decks like this. Because mono red can kill you before turn 5, and it can burn you out after you get all your value. So mono red just checks this so hard.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, when it goes off against a mid range deck, which is what I've been playing, it is like okay, it's kind of like the old Nexus of Fate games where it's just like I know that it's not deterministic that you're gonna win, but it's pretty much game over. So I'm gonna spare us both some time and go to the next one.
Yeah, and I would bet the prevalence of mono red, which has been kind of ticking up lately, would explain why you haven't seen this deck in a couple of days. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it's gonna crush the decks it crushes, and it's gonna get crushed by the
yeah.
decks that crush it. It's kind of how it feels. It's
I
zero
was gonna
sum.
bring this up later, with when I'm talking about the deck that I've come up with, but I haven't played in a standard that has felt so rock paper scissors ever. Like the deck I have does great against aggro, and that's a mid-range deck. And it does pretty darn poorly against control, and control I feel does pretty darn poorly against mono red.
Yeah.
Like that has always been the checks and balances that have existed in 60 card formats, like standard. But this seems more prevalent than ever. Um, so just knowing that, and with the prevalence of mono red having build your deck to beat mono red, I think is where I ended up at least for my journey.
Okay.
So is there
Well,
anything else from standard that kind of popped up for you, Sam?
no, I think that just about does it. So why don't you take us into some of the decks you've been playing in your
Yeah.
sweet
So
brews?
so I mean, I'm a free to play arena player, proud of it, and cards I open in my packs were I got some packs to start off with my saved up coins from last set, and I got some Rankles pranks, and I got some Beseech the Mirrors in my packs. And I went to work brewing because I was very excited about Rankles prank as a card,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically to use it as a reanimator. So I finished my playset of Atraxa. I tried Atali at first, but reanimating Atali when you don't have that much gas in your deck, like there's a Breach the Multiverse deck, which maybe you'd rather hit Atali than Atraxa, get the value now. But the way that the card advantage of this deck works, you really just want Atraxa to refill your hand. Because the play pattern is Hopeless Nightmare, turn 1. Okay, so Hopeless Nightmare, we didn't talk about it, but it is an amazing card. It's a 1 mana black enchantment at common. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. And it also has when it leaves the battlefield, scry 2, and you can sacrifice it for 3 mana if you need to. So you get your Hopeless Nightmare down, or as a additional Beseech thing, I have a Gumdrop Poisoner in here, which is the beginning. Both you and I were very high in this card. I'm interested to see if you managed to use it at all. I have loved it so far in my other deck primarily. Turn 2, you have some interaction. Get rid of their main like beatdown, whatever their Monastery mentor. Sorry, mon mon. I almost said Monastery. I don't know what I said honestly.
I'm gonna assume you're talking about Monastery
Yes,
Swift
the one
Spear.
drop. Yeah, the Swift Spear, the red one drop, and yeah, Witch's Vanity, which will let you hit Beseech later. Shielder's Edict is great. Go for the throat. Just your standard 2 drop removal, and then you drop Liliana, and you can minus if you need to get rid of a creature, or you can plus to drop Atraxa in the bin, or Phyrexian Fleshgorger if you're not lucky enough to have Atraxa in hand, and then you Beseech the Mirror to grab a Shoulders Restoration. And Shoulders Restoration is the card that I found that I didn't know existed. It's a 4-mana Reanimator spell that lets you return a target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Um, you're not kicking it, so you lose 7 life if you reanimate Atraxa. Which, if you have a lifelinker, 7/7 lifelinker, not that bad of a deal. With Phyrexian Fleshgorger as well.
Yeah,
So
they
it's
both have 7 power and lifelink, right?
yes,
So
it works out beautifully. I played this deck a lot. There was only a couple times when we got late into the game where I couldn't pay the life cost for Shieldred's Restoration. So you can also use Rankle's Prank to discard the Atraxa. And there was so many games that I, on turn 4 or 5, um, had an Atraxa on board with a full hand, and they had 4 lands, no creatures, no hand at all, just because of how powerful this is. And Beseech the Mirror makes it work because this is essentially a combo where you need a discard and you need Shieldred's Restoration. Beseech the Mirror lets you find whichever side of that combo you're missing.
sure, yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, this deck was a lot of fun. When it won incredibly hard. When it lost, it sometimes felt like it did nothing if you drew the wrong parts of the combo. But it really like Teach the Mirror has really struggled to find a place in standard because it's not a value piece. You're actually down on resources if you cast it. It has to be mono black or very black leaning mana base. And there's not a lot of 4 drops. We kind of joked about having Shieldred as like just copies 5 through 8 of Shieldred, but 4 copies is normally enough. So I had a lot of fun with it, but I don't think it's as good as the other deck that I'm gonna talk about. Do you
All
have any
right.
thoughts on the deck, Dan?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I like what's going on here. I think it just seems reasonable. You know, like getting a
Yeah.
Traxa, which this deck can do, is always going to be strong. And I like some of the control elements. I like that it's mono black, which lets us run some like utility lands like Mirrex and Blast Zone,
Yeah.
Takanuma. It seems pretty good, but I am excited to hear about this other one that you've just hyped up. So let's talk about
Yeah,
that.
this is I tried a couple versions of this deck. I'm calling it Life Gain Scam. It's based is the Gumdrop Poisoner deck with Not Dead After All. So those are like the 2 big cards coming in from Eldraine, in addition to Virtue of Persistence, which I have 2 copies of, so I'm playing 2 of them. And it also has Rankle's Prank. I swear that this is not a pet card. I swear, I promise. But I have killed people with each player loses 4 life. I have taken out Graveyard Trespasser Shieldred boards, um, and I have gotten value of sacking my own creatures with a Not Dead After All on it. The only reason it's not a 2 of is because if you ever draw 2 Rankles Pranks, it's just the worst. If you're playing against a control deck and you have 2 Rankles Pranks in your hand, you are just the saddest person in the whole universe. You just go to the next game. It doesn't matter what your other cards are.
All right, I believe you. It's a perfect one up. So what's the primary game plan of this deck? The other
Yeah,
deck was
so the
trying to
lines.
reanimate Shieldred, not
Yeah, we
Shieldred,
don't have
the
any
other thing,
soldiers in this. We got rid of our
Traxa.
soldiers restorations. So this deck is using a couple really sweet lines that it has. On turn 1, we have a cut down if we need it. On turn 2, we can ambitious farmhands. I really am looking for a replacement to this card, but it actually does really well, getting us a lot of our mana base is kind of budgety, so it gets us our second planes if we need to cast Steel Seraph. And then we get to turn 3, and turn 3 is where it really kicks off. The idea is that we can play a Phyrexian Fleshgorger or a Steel Seraph on turn 3 and know your matchup. There's games or matchups you want to wait until turn 4 because then you have Not Dead After All to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
And I went I kept track once I reached Platinum up until Diamond, and I went 37 and 14 with this deck in the
In
ranked
best
ladder.
of one standard.
In best of one standard, 37 and 14. And probably should have led with that. That's an outrageous. That is an outrageous win percentage. And I'm not a genius Magic player. I'm not like, there's definitely some very proud moments that I've had, but this this deck is, at least the last week or so, just destroys mono red. I'm probably 20-1 against mono red, and apart from getting mana screwed one time, you just destroy every single hope that they have. When they lightning bolt your Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, and you not dead after all, come back with a 8/6 lifelinker with menace. What are they gonna do? Like, they're gonna cry. They just, a lot of times that's the game. They just see that on the stack and they just leave.
Yeah.
So, okay, you did it.
So this
Um,
does seem like, just looking at, so it seems like a great deck that also is really well positioned in that mono red metagame we were
yeah.
talking about. And the Steel Seraph and Phyrexian Fleshgorger, I just want to talk about those cards if people aren't
Yeah.
familiar with them. They're both 3 mana prototypes that you can play. So they can be earlier in the game plays. They can be later in the game plays if you get to 7 or 6 mana. But
Hmm.
if they leave the battlefield and come back, which is what you're talking about, like if you blink
Yeah.
them, or if they
That's the
die and
scam.
you cast Not Dead After All on them, so when they die they return to the battlefield. They return in their big form, and they are both, like, the Flesh Gorger has lifelink, and the Seraph can give itself or another creature lifelink. So yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to be gaining life, and poor mono red in that situation.
Yeah, the creme de la creme for this deck, I think, is Gumdrop Poisoner, which is our Eldraine card. It's a 3 mana 3/2 with lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, up to one target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gained.
Mm-hmm.
So you can cast it as its adventure for 1 black to create a food token. I've kind of come around to the idea that you'd rather keep it in hand as a surprise, because
Yeah.
you drop the Flesh Gorger, they play whatever creature they have at 3 mana. You swing in with the Flesh Gorger. It has menace, so they can't block it, or they're extremely disadvantaged to block it. So they let it go through. It does 3 damage, and then you just bring in the Gumdrop Poisoner, and now you have an additional 3/2 with lifelink that kills anything that has 3 or less toughness through indestructibility. It also works really well with Sheoldred, who is owning the 4-drop spot in our deck.
Mm-hmm.
I've become a believer in the cult of Sheoldred, but only for the life gain synergies. So you can just Sheoldred on 4. If you have nothing else, Gumdrop Poisoner on 5, and kill something with 2 toughness. There's a Virtue of Persistence, has -3/-3. You gain 2 life. So if you do the Lochthwain Scorn, you get -3/-3, gain 2 life. You cast Gumdrop Prisoner, they get -2/-2. That kills a Shouldered right there for 5 mana. You don't even have to sack the food token.
Mm-hmm.
Gumdrop Poisoner also works really well with Not Dead After All. You swing in, they block. I've killed 6/6s with it. I killed a Vorinclex, a big green guy. You swing in, they block. They say, "What are you doing? This is my 6/6. You have a 3/2. Not Dead After All." Drop Poisoner comes back as a 4/3 lifelink, gives the Vorinclex -3/-3, um, kills
And
it, and then they immediately scoop.
right, because it
So
had taken 3 damage before. So you've got
exactly.
a bunch of great cards. Mostly the Poisoner, the Seraph, and the Flesh Gorger that love being blinked or dying and coming
Yeah.
back. And then you have Touch the Spirit Realm and Not Dead After All to
Yeah,
make
Touch
those
the
things
Spirit Realm
happen.
is the only thing that you have to deal with control matchups. I tried this deck in different variants, and if you don't have it, and you're against something that exiles your creatures, you don't have a lot of actions. You're just playing slightly subcosted creatures that do not race that well against control. So you need to touch the Spirit Realm. But if you get that off, Fresh and Flex Forger has Ward for its life. So wait for them to finish paying their 3 life, and then you reanimate it, bring it back as a 7/5. They're going to be really hesitant to target it again with targeted removal. So
Right, that accounts for 10 damage right there.
yeah, that's 10 damage, and you're neutral on cards. So it's
Yeah.
uh, it's been a lot of fun. It's had a lot of success. I think the like at least half of the 14 losses were me misplaying. So I recommend this deck. I don't want to play against it. People don't expect it, so maybe I'm kind of outing myself here. We'll see if I run into it, but I love this deck. It's been a lot of fun. It's really mischievous when you get incredible value and kill somebody with it. And just every time you see that on that single basic mountain on their first play, you just know it's going to be a good game. You just smile to yourself. Word to the wise, save your removal for the Faces Kakuzam card because that will turn off You're Not Dead After All because it exiles instead of dies.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that's a good point. So I
yeah.
think last thing to go over in this deck is walk me through the two planeswalkers that we're playing, and also
Yeah.
so the mana base here. So we have this is a fairly budgeted mana base. So I just like to
Yeah,
point out that
that's my constraint.
it could be probably strengthened a little bit if you have the wild cards or the cash on hand, however
Yeah.
you're
No,
playing.
this
Um,
is
look
used
at
all my wild cards just to get it good enough because it's tough playing the Flesh Gorger and the Steel
the
Seraph, which
Seraph,
both require one and then double white and one and double black.
right?
I definitely have lost a game because of mana colors and maybe a budget, less budget. I mean, it is an expensive mana base,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
as is, but even putting more duels in there for black white uh, definitely helped the deck out.
Yeah, and not to just
So,
stay on this deck forever, but have you tried or thought about the Restless Land from Wilds of Eldraine? Because that
yeah,
has
yeah.
some life
I
gain
just
associated with it, right?
Yeah, I just haven't. I actually think I just opened one of them, so I would definitely put that in instead of my Scoured Barrens. I'm excited for the Gumdrop Poisoner kill off of Scoured Barrens. It hasn't happened yet, but I kind of wanted it to happen before I took it out. But I think it's time for him to go on to live another life.
Sure. All right,
But
now
yeah.
touch on these planeswalkers. What's how they played
So
out?
Eternal Wanderer lets you blink. Lets you blink one of your artifacts or creatures,
Mm-hmm.
which will bring it back on the more expensive side. It also has a board wipe, and you normally only have one or two creatures on your battlefield. You can also not dead after all your Flesh Gorger, and then one side and then Wrath, and then keep your Shouldered, and then your Flesh Gorger comes back, and then they're staring. They have a whatever faithful companion, and you have a Shouldered, an Eternal Wanderer, and a 7/5 Flesh Gorger, which is a win immediately. And then Kaya, I just wanted to play this card. I think it's good. It's actually gotten rid of some Virtue of Persistences. When you get to the point where you need Kaya, even just as like a 3 mana burn spell, it's actually gotten me a fair amount of wins. So I don't know if it's optimal. I'm on the fence about cutting it. I definitely wouldn't run more than one, just because the way the meta is, you're running this deck, you can't have too many 7 drops that
Mm-hmm.
you actually have to pay 7 mana for. But it actually got me. It's gotten me some wins, and it's hasn't felt that bad sitting in my hand. So I've kept it in the deck.
Yeah, I'll go on record. I haven't played this deck. I like this deck a lot. Looking at it, it seems. I'm sure it could be tweaked or tuned by
Yeah,
our
yeah.
genius listeners, but just looking at it,
Yeah, have fun with it. These cards work incredibly well. I haven't even mentioned all the synergies, but just the Gumdrop Poisoner, being resurrected, the lifelink, the it's just been
yeah,
a lot of fun brewing it. This is where I got it to. I haven't made any changes to it since I did the run. So these are the cards that went 37 and 14. Really preying on mono red. Really doing. I think it does very well in mid-range mirrors.
mm-hmm.
I think you just have a little more value and a little bigger creatures.
Yeah, you go over the
And
top a bit.
yeah, you do pretty well against other mid-range decks, especially when they use their removal on something that you have a Not Dead After All or a Touch the Spirit Realm ready to go. If you're playing it, don't don't be afraid to use Touch the Spirit Realm as a removal spell. It's a lot of times, even blinking opponent creatures is sometimes something you have to do. It's a very useful card that is like super useful when you're saving your Flesh Gorger from a spell and then bringing it back and cheating 4 mana worth of value on it.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's
100%.
where I'm at. I recommend this deck. Don't tell your friends though. I don't want to play against it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I'm gonna avoid playing against it by staying out of the standard queues. I've been living in Pioneer and Explorer world because I will just note if you're a budget minded person, not having your cards rotate is always a nice feature. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I've got a couple things I want to go through, three
All
lists
right, I'm excited about it.
specifically.
Let me know.
So the first one is I'm calling it Emery's Cauldron. It's just a pioneer slash explorer deck looking to maximize Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which is one of the standout cards from Wilds of Eldraine. That's gone up to like $45 a copy. So caveat: this is not one of the budget decks that I'm going to talk about. The upside of this one is on Arena. It's just 4 Mythic Wild cards,
Yeah.
and
I think
everything
that
else.
price will come down.
No, it almost certainly will. But it's actually just a super cracked card.
Why don't we talk about it? Because this is something that I have to think about because I've seen it a lot in standard too, but I really have to think about it every time. I think I've got it under our control, but let's go through it for the reader, for the
Yeah,
listeners.
yeah. It's a 2 mana legendary artifact that lets you spend mana if it's over any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. That almost never comes up. What you really care
Right.
about is that it can exile a target card from a graveyard when you tap it, and if a creature card is exiled that way, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Totally reasonable. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So this deck is built around activated abilities, artifacts, and making it all work together around Voldaren Thrillseeker, which has an activated ability I really like. It's a 3 mana vampire warrior. It's a 1/1 with backup 2. So when it enters the battlefield, you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. It can do itself, it can do another creature. And then that whatever creature you pick gains the ability that Voldaren Thrillseeker has, which is pay 1 mana and sacrifice the creature. It deals 1 damage equal to its power to any target. So this should be starting to come together for you, where if you had it puts +1/+1 counters on things, which turns them on for Soul Cauldron, and if you exile a Thrillseeker from your graveyard with this Soul Cauldron, all your creatures with +1/+1 counters have that sack ability, which can really close the game. Because the other creatures we're playing are things like Stonecoil Serpent, which is an X
Yeah.
creature that can come in with a bunch of counters. Patchwork Automaton, which is going to get counters every time you play an artifact. And Steel Overseer, which taps to put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control. Very importantly, that's also an activated ability. So Agatha's Soul Cauldron can
Yep.
give all your artifacts that ability. Um, and then we've got, rounding it out, we've got two, the Ozolith, which this card like never came up when I was playing this, and then when it did, I had it as a 1 of in the deck, and I immediately crafted the second rare and put it in because I wanted it to happen more often. Because like the power of like you play a Thrill Seeker on something, you make
Right.
it bigger, you sack the Thrill Seeker, you put it under a cauldron, put a counter on something. Before combat, you all these things that have gotten counters, say it's like a 7/7 Stonecoil Serpent. You sack it to the Voldaren Thrillseeker ability that the Cauldron gives it to do 7 damage to them. Those counters go on the Ozolith. You go to combat, those counters go on another creature. You sack that creature with the Thrillseeker ability that the Cauldron gives it to do like another 7, 8, 9 damage. And it's like, it's
It's
so good.
insane.
It's
It's
absolutely
absolutely
over the top.
insane.
Maybe keeping it as a 1 of is right because it doesn't do a ton on its own, but it was just so. I felt like I was on top of the world, and lightning was coming down from the gods and striking me and imbuing me with their powers. It was like, holy moly. And then we get to run Emery, Lurker of the Loch, that goes with all our artifacts to reduce the cost, and we can tap Emery to cast an artifact card from from our graveyard. All of our creatures with +1/+1 counters get that ability. And then we have a removal suite of Lightning Axe, Torch the Tower, and Voltage Surge, which I am not convinced that that's correct. It's just what I was playing because it's fairly efficient. Lightning Axe has you discard a card from your hand and pay 1 mana to do 5 damage to a creature. That helps you get things in your graveyard for Soul Cauldron. Torch the Tower, you can sacrifice an artifact for it, and Voltage Surge too, so you can move things from play to the graveyard, exile them with Agatha Soul Cauldron, get their abilities on all your creatures. Another key card here is Ginger Brute that we're playing. So it's a 1 mana 1/1 with haste. You can pay 1 mana to make it so it can't be blocked except by creatures with haste this turn. That is a very good ability for all of your creatures that
Oh
are pretty
yeah.
big to have.
Yep.
So I've been testing Soul Cauldron decks with Voldaren Thrillseeker all over the place. When I have been playing Standard, it's been trying to test that out in Standard, which I believe in, but I haven't cracked the code on that yet. This list right here is far from perfect. I'm showing it and sharing it as like an exploratory thing, just because I truly believe in like the raw power of Soul Cauldron and Emery and Thrill Seeker and Ginger Brute and Steel Overseer. Like that package has been really, 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 really convincing that it's the real deal. So there's something here. There's something here.
What's like the fastest kill you've gotten getting 20 damage across?
Um,
What's the best line turns 1 through 4 or 5 that ends the game?
so I'm not sure that this is a fast deck generally.
Okay,
Um, it closes out of nowhere is more its thing, and it grinds really
yeah,
well. Because the
that's
thing,
good reach.
yeah, because most games honestly end with like a 6/6 or 7/7 Stone Coil Serpent attacking, either unblockable because of Ginger Brute's ability,
Yeah,
or just having trample, and they take a big chunk of damage, and then you play a Thrill Seeker if you didn't do that before comment to put two more counters on it and throw that at their face. So it's like that's usually like 14, 15 damage in a turn kind of thing. And the thing about Soul Cauldron that I think is really underrated, because the card does a lot. It's graveyard hate, it makes your creatures bigger, it gives them cool
it's the
abilities.
best kind of graveyard hate. It doesn't cost mana and it's instant speed and
Yeah,
like it responds to reanimation. It's what you want in your graveyard hate.
it's extremely flexible. But I've been impressed by how this is like lined up in the mid range matchups against like good old Rakdos mid. Um,
Hmm.
because as the game goes on, it every creature you play is amazing because it has several strong abilities from the Soul Cauldron. Like when every Ginger Brute you play later in the game can tap to put counters on itself and every other artifact creature and make itself unblockable and tap to cast artifacts from your graveyard and like pay one and sacrifice it to fling it at something like that. Like that's just a broken creature. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
it builds up a critical mass over the course of the game. So every piddly little creature you play is a must kill threat that's better than whatever they have going on over there. Um, and the closing speed, the interaction, like Thrill Seeker's ability being available to you on a bunch of different creatures all throughout the game is low key like a removal suite. Because if you need to throw a creature here to kill their Shieldred, if you need to throw a creature here to kill their Karn, um, like it can be done. Um, although I just mentioned Karn. I will say Karn really bones this deck. With his
I was gonna
static.
say there's not a lot of artifact hate, but there is one very prevalent
Yeah.
artifact hate card that sees a lot of play in the format.
Yeah. So I will say I believe in this deck on a power level. The things that it does is extremely strong. I do not believe in this deck right now in a metagame position because I don't think it's very good against mono green. I don't imagine it's very
Yeah.
good against Rakdos Sacrifice. It's just so maybe it's not its time. Maybe it'll never be its time. But boy, is this deck sweet. So did want to bring it up for our listeners.
Yeah, I like it because there's a lot of synergies and all the cards are pretty good on their own. So I also like it because it seems to be like there's going to be a lot of paths you can take. So even if it's not the most powerful thing, I like those decks that you play where you're like, ah, shoot, like what if I thought of this at that time? Like what if this? And you have like multiple different angles that you can take while playing it. That you feel like you're actually getting better at playing the deck. So
Yeah,
I
it's
really appreciate decks like that, even if they're not mono green devotion.
it's definitely tricky, and I like referring to those decks as decks that are smarter than me, because it's not the deck's fault that I don't do it right.
Exactly. A
It's
perfect
my
player
fault.
would definitely achieve a 51% win rate.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So the next deck I want to talk about, and we've talked a lot about mono red and standard. This is the one I most want to highlight, and I've spent the most time testing and playing in Best of Three Explorer, but it's also obviously then Pioneer legal. Um, we're giving this the other decks we've talked about haven't necessarily been budget brews. This one in
Yeah.
the Monetary Mentor Spirit, this is a 4 rares, no mythics deck on Arena. This is a $52 in paper deck, and I think it's pretty good. Like, is it the greatest deck of all time? Are we breaking the metagame? No, but this deck is legitimately quite good. Um, so this is featuring the card Monstrous Rage from Wilds of Eldraine.
Absolute house.
Which 1 mana, red instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Create a monster roll token attached to it, which is an aura that gives it +1/+1 and trample. So this card essentially gives +3/+1 and trample to a creature, and that creature gets to keep +1/+1 and trample for all turns going forward. That's the only new card, so it's weird that it might seem like it's weird that I'm highlighting this as a Wilds of Eldraine build, but Monstrous Rage has been so good for me testing this. Because it's the rest of the deck, it's 4 Monastery Swiftspear, 4 Soulscar Mage, that's your 4 rares, 4 Electrostatic Infantry, 4 Kenris Spell Spear. And then your spell suite is 4 Ancestral Rage, 4 Monstrous Rage, 4 Play with Fire, 4 Reckless Rage, 2 Spikefield Hazard, 3 Titan Strength, 1 Reckless Impulse, and 4 Ren's Resolve to go with 14 Mountains and 4 Ramunap Ruins. So this is a mono red prowess deck. Electrostatic Infantry doesn't technically have prowess, but it triggers in a prowess-like way on instants and sorceries. So your 16 creatures, your 26 spells, your 18 lands, plus your 2 Spikefield Hazards. And this deck, you asked about how fast the other one kills. Boy, oh boy, have I killed...
Don't tell me. Don't tell me.
Have I killed a lot of control players when they have 3 tapped lands because they, played Quick Study and drew 2 cards, or played an Absorb to counter one of my turn 4 plays when I'm on the play and they're on the draw, and then I just kill them anyway. This is wild. The sideboard I do just want to mention, because I think it's pretty good actually. 3 Tormod's Crypt, 3 Infuriate, 3 Rending Volley, 3 Reckless Impulse, and 3 Saheeli Sublime Artificer. I'll talk a little bit about the point of all those cards later. But this deck has just been impressing me, and I think for price, you're not going to beat it. It is a dumb mono red deck at first look, and we try and avoid building those because that's what people, when they think of budget decks, are like, well, you can play Burn, and it's like, yeah, but this is not Burn. We talked about decks that are smarter than me. This is dangerously close to a deck that's smarter than me. I have found in my playing, because I have left many a win on the table with missequencing when you get your prowess triggers to maximize damage, if you play creatures or spells before combat, if what you do after combat, what you save on their turn because you expect them to have damage-based removal and you want to be able to play a pump spell to save one of your creatures from one of those, versus when you get in for damage. This is not an easy deck to play, which I love because you can figure it out, you can get good at this deck, but it is not mindless. This is a boring deck. This is a good, interesting, extremely cheap deck, which I love.
Yeah, no, I think mono red decks, there is like a skill to them, and this is one of the more skilled ones. Just finding the damage, like it's a numbers thing. Like you just have to figure out what can I go for broke here, playing around things like Absorb and Seal Away and whatever they're gonna do to stop you. I think mono red decks can definitely be rewarding to play. And if you're playing in Explorer and you are an Explorer player, you probably already have copies of the Soul Seared Mage in your collection. Soul Scarred Mage, yeah. So just go ahead and try it out. In Standard, we mentioned the red virtue in our preview show. I think that I have play tested the just a mono red burn deck with the forgetting the name, Virtue of Courage. Courage. If you build it around the forgetting all the names of the cards here, but there's several, the Kessig Flame Breather and the Thermo Alchemist and Monastery Swiftspear, because it's just an amazing card, and then just a lot of burn spells, just everything that deals direct damage. You can have some amazingly fun turns with the Virtue of Courage on the battlefield, and it might not be better than Mono Red, and it might not be more budget friendly, but it is a very fun iteration of it. So if you happen to open a couple of those in your packs, go ahead and use a couple mythic rares on it, and it'll give you some joy when you're popping off, 5 straight spells to burn someone from 20 to nothing. So
And that's what we play for. I did want
yeah,
to talk about
recommend
some
it.
interesting angles on this deck. Like, what really made it pop, because most of these cards existed before, but Monstrous Rage has actually made like all the difference.
Yeah,
Because Trample is huge, right? Like, let's just
it
talk about
really
that.
is.
So your creatures, your Swift Spears don't have Trample. Your Soulscar Mages don't have Trample. Your Infantry has Trample. Your Kenra Spell Spear has Trample. Ancestral Rage grants Trample, and now you have Monstrous Rage that also grants Trample. So being able to like attack, they block, you remove one of the two blockers they threw on your guy, and then you buff the guy so the like it doesn't die from the damage coming back, and the trample damage goes through. It's just absolutely huge. It takes away one of the big issues of these decks. Is like the running out of gas thing, right? And so one way that these decks used to run out of gas is you would attack with a Monastery Swift Spear into like a 3/3 that they have, right? And they say, okay, I'll block. And then you have to spend mana pumping your creature so it doesn't die, and you win that trade, that's fine. But if you use like 2 pump spells on that, then your creature survives, theirs dies, but your hand's going to be really light on stuff to do next time, and you didn't get any of that damage going through from saving your creature
Yeah.
with the pump. So it's like weirdly a form of card advantage having trample in this deck, because you're getting damage from your cards, and that's what you need them for. And the other way that this deck doesn't run out of gas is you have 5 of these Reckless Impulse effects, 1 Reckless Impulse and 4 Rend Resolves that could obviously be flipped. They should really probably be split up so that you have like 2 of one and 3 of another, so that like if someone surgical extractions you or something, but it doesn't really matter. But 5 of these effects has felt right, and I have 3 more in the sideboard. The 3 you're not playing from that set of 8 goes in the sideboard for the grindier matchups, because like so often you're essentially down to 1 or 2 cards in your hand on turn 4, and you have a couple creatures on the board, and they're at 11, 12 life, and then you play this, which triggers all your prowess stuff and essentially draws you 2 cards, which is usually enough to put the game away from there. And it's also not even like a bad early play if you don't have a lot going on, because you just play it. You can't play the cards that are exiled, but you can play them next turn. So this is great
Yeah.
for helping find extra land drops and kind
Yeah.
of keeping up with it. So I've been really impressed with all those cards. Obviously, Ramming Up Ruins has a lot of utility, closing out games. Um, but it's just impressed me. Like honestly, you have a pretty decent interaction suite with 4 Reckless Rage and 4 Play with Fire. The Soulscar Mage makes those Play with Fires really interesting because it can shrink creatures into the range where you're then going to win combat against them. Um, it's a neat little deck. It feels very tuned. It feels very fast and sleek. I've liked it a lot. And I'm not a mono red guy. I am not
I know. I'm wondering what
typically.
happened to my brother. He has become death.
Yeah,
Um,
what can I
I
say?
do enjoy mono red on occasion, and I'm definitely going to try this deck out. So thanks for sharing it. Do you have one more that you wanted to share with us?
Well, I do want to talk about the sideboard
Okay.
for just a
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
second,
Just give us
because
some sideboard
because
info.
we're in big boy best of 3 land now.
Yeah. I did. Yeah. I don't care for. Yeah. Yeah. It's.
I know a
I'm a
lot
s- I'm a
arena.
I'm a solo best of one. Scam them and get on to the next one. That's me.
That's right. Um, but so Tormund, we have 3 Tormund's Crypt, which is great because it's a 0 mana way to hate on the graveyard and trigger our prowess creatures. It does not trigger electrostatic infantry, but it's a way to, like, if you're playing against Greasefang, you can play this and push extra damage through it without sacrificing like your clock and tempo, because you don't have to spend 1 or 2 mana like you would for a Rest in Peace, to hate on their graveyard. And it doesn't, you're playing a very fast deck, so you don't need like permanent forever graveyard hate. You just need to buy yourself a turn or two, right? Which is what
Yeah.
Tormod's Crypt can do for you. You have 3 Infuriate here for the we just need to kill them faster, and the removal spells in our deck aren't that great because Infuriate is just an instant +3/+2 effect for 1 red. So if you're playing against like Control and your Reckless Rages as a removal spell aren't going to be good, yank some of those out there for the Infuriates to just get damage through faster. Or against something like Lotus Field where you're just trying to race them. We have 3 Rending Volley, which is amazing against spirits and humans. The being able to take out like Adeline, or Spirit Lords, or anything along those lines. I find myself bringing Rending Volley all the time. Uh, Reckless Impulse, I mentioned this a little bit, bringing the last 3 copies out of the board to be a bit more grindy, as well as the Saheeli Sublime Artificer. Like, I'm not sure Rakdos midrange can beat this card. Like you play it
Yeah.
and it lives, and then you're getting a couple of these 1/1s a turn. This is also for grindy matchups. If you can stick this early against Control, it's just going to put them in a really tough spot. Anything that you just want quality in your cards over some of the kill them now as quickly as possible stuff, is really going to be useful here. And this deck has been great against mono green in testing. It's been great against Control. It's been great against kind of everything except the angel decks that you like. I will
Oh, I
caveat
do love
this:
the Angel
just
deck.
scoop against the life gain decks and save yourself some time because they're playing a bad deck, but their bad deck just beats your
Okay,
deck.
I was gonna let you move on, but the Angel deck is an amazing deck. It's a fun deck. It's the only way to play the format. So that's all I'm gonna say on it.
I have no doubt. So that is Monstrous Rage, Mono Red Prowess, $52 in paper, 4 rare wild cards on Arena, 9 tickets on Magic Online. Like, it doesn't get cheaper than this, and for bang for your buck, this is actually a very impressive deck in my
Yeah,
experience.
and it gets games over quickly. If you want to climb,
If you're
if you want
climbing the
to
ladder,
get
for
want to
sure.
climb the ladder, if you want to get your quests done, this deck is gonna get you there. It's gonna be your tried and true. It's an honest man farming some experience and rank.
That's
You
right.
know.
Um, I had one more deck I want to talk about. This one's very brief.
Yeah.
I have not tested this, but something that I
Ooh,
really
secret
like.
technology.
Yeah, it's just something I really like is kind of the position I think green white auras or boggles is in after Wilds of Eldraine because of the card Toadstool Admirer, which is a 1 mana 1/1 with Ward 2. You can also pay 4 mana to put +1/+1 counter on it, but that's almost never going to come up. Which is almost copies 5 through 8 of your Glade Cover Scouts. I just think that this card, because it has Ward 2 and it can die to like a Fatal Push on turn 3, but they have to take their whole third turn to do it, and by then you've suited it up with some stuff, or you've had time to find like another protection spell like Alpha Authority that gives it hexproof, or if you're playing like Royal Treatment or something, God's Willing type stuff. I think it just gives the deck what it's been missing, and I think this green white boggles is really well positioned in like a Rakdos sacrifice mono green metagame, which we've been in for a while in Explorer and Pioneer. Just because you're gonna race mono green with just like putting ethereal armors and all that glitters and griff spoons on your creatures and getting over and smashing them before they can go off, and all your creatures that really matter are hexproof. So good luck stealing them and throwing them in ovens, So this deck that I have mocked up, and we'll put links to all these decks in the video description, so check those out. But this comes out to like $70 once you cut Beseju and some of the other expensive stuff that you don't need so much. And I just think that like I'm super high on that mono red list we were talking about, but this one's probably like better. It's you can't play it on Arena because we don't have Glade Cover Scout, and it is a little more expensive in paper. But if you can swing it in paper, this one's probably going to set you up a little better. Just because I think the deck's pretty well positioned in the metagame right now. So that's the last one I wanted to mention. But other than that, I think I'm tapped out. Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Awesome. Yeah, I think we need to make our first official apology. I think we
Go
should.
on.
We need to apologize to Mosswood Dread Knight. We both thought it was garbage. It turns out it's okay. I'm willing to admit. I'm willing to admit that it's okay. I've seen a lot of it. Um, it is its own slow value engine by itself in a can, and there are decks that use it. I've seen a lot of it. I've seen a lot of four ofs. Um, and
No.
I'm willing to admit that it's okay. I'm not going to say it's great. It's kind of like a brick that makes the deck, like a structural piece of the deck, but I think it's
No.
okay. I'm willing
No,
to
I owe
admit
that
that.
card nothing. So it's the 11th most played creature in Standard right now on MTG
Yeah.
Goldfish,
Mhm.
in 13% of decks. I
As
think
a two-color creature,
as a two,
bonus.
but I think we had this card right. I think we said it's just not going to be as good as people think it is because it is fine. It's just like a fine
Yeah.
card. But like we look, I bet if we look at other formats like outside of Standard, I doubt it's going to be like how's it doing in Pioneer? Top
Oh,
creatures.
I doubt it's.
Show me
Yeah, I doubt
Monastery
it's.
Dread Knight.
Also with Dread Knight. I don't think you're gonna find it. I haven't
No,
done the research.
not
That's why I said it was terrible. I'm willing to admit that it's okay. If I
yes.
see an opponent playing this card, I have absolutely no worries, but it is like not just a free win. So
No, it's a reasonable card, but it got a lot of
yeah,
hype that I don't think it's
I
still
thought
lived
that it
up
would
to.
be not played at all, but I think it's getting people are the price has gone up at a certain point. I think what people are actually realizing is that Glissa Sunslayer is amazing. First strike death touch that draws you cards and destroys things like okay, that's the actual thing that people have just realized is good. That's why you play Golgari. So if Mosswood Dread Knight means that you can play Glissa Sunslayer, then I guess Mosswood Dread Knight can be the mud brick, not even a clay brick, a mud brick that you build your deck with. But I would like to apologize because we were very down on that card.
Fair enough. Apology accepted. On behalf of the
Yeah,
Mosswood Dread Knight, I accept your
yeah,
apology.
yeah. Thank you. And I'd also like to propose a rules change to Magic. 11th hour. I'd like to just change the rules of Magic: The Gathering, use our platform for good, and I'd like to change the rules for Cascade, specifically going back to our Cascade deck. I don't want any bans for this deck. What I would like them to do is change the rules of Cascade so it says you can cast a spell that has. I mean, you're the rules guy. You tell me exactly how it does. But if you Cascade into Bramble Familiar, you have a 2 mana spell and a 7 mana spell. And you're allowed to cast anything 4 or under. You can cast that 2 mana spell. In fact, I actually played against someone who did accidentally click the 2 mana spell and then immediately rage quit. So hats off to you, sir. You are the truth. Um, but it was very satisfying to watch. Immediate rage quit. I was like, oh, that's cute. So I think I don't. You keep the cards as is, but you change the wording because we had something happen with this with the Tybalt card, where the Clever Impersonator, where you're casting your 7 mana Planeswalker instead of your 2 mana creature. And I think that if I designed a game and someone said, well, actually, technically in the rules, I can actually cast the 7 mana version instead of the 2 mana version, I'd say, oh, shoot, you're right. Let me change that as soon as possible because that's clearly not how the cards are designed and that's not how we want the game to work. Well done figuring it out. You're really cool. I'm going to change the rules of the game so it actually makes sense. So that's all I'm going to say. It's to me, it would make a lot of decks that are fringe playable, not playable, but I'm okay with that, and it would make more sense in terms of how they design these cards. Because I think it's unfair because this deck could have been amazing, and I don't think that the game design were even thinking about this combo when they released these cards. And I think it's unfair for them to have to worry about all these combos people are finding. And I think a really safe way to protect against a lot of them is just change the rules, make everyone happy.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna
So.
weigh on if they should or shouldn't, but they did do something similar in changing how Cascade works. For
Okay.
essentially that very reason, you can no longer cascade into Tybalt Cosmic Imposter off of Cascade, which I think is probably for the best. Um,
Oh, for
but
sure.
but this is
That's not how the game's supposed to work.
Yes, but I will say in defense of janky nonsense that was never intended to happen, that's kind of the beautiful part of Magic, right? It's-
I'm willing to say whoever came up with this, you're awesome. You deserve, or whatever think group came up with this, whatever we perfected it, like really cool, really awesome to see against me one time, maybe even two times. But it's not what the game design's supposed to be, and I don't know why they allow these things to happen. If I was the one making the rules and I realized this could happen, I would be changing it and feeling embarrassed about it. It's a bug, not a feature kind of angle.
okay. It's time. It's time for us to stop. If you're a WotC
All right.
employee listening to this, send all hate mail to jp at monetary mentor dot he's not gonna get your message.com.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
uh,
Thanks for listening.
and yeah, we'll read all your messages there. Um, Otherwise, thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you all soon.
Bye.
And that does it. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like the video. And please reach out to me with any questions, either in the comments or on Twitter at Monetary Mentor. I look forward to hearing from you, and until then, be kind to yourself and have fun out there.